Welcome to the Tackling Tech podcast, powered by DyKnow. Join us as we tackle all things EdTech with insightful interviews, actionable tips, and strategies that you can implement in your school or district to make technology integration more effective. Whether you're a teacher, a tech coach, or a technology administrator, we're giving you an advantage in your role by sharing stories from people who are passionate about working with their peers and enhancing the learning experience with technology. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Now let's tackle some tech.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tackling Tech, a podcast that shares stories about how you can build better collaboration in K-12 schools, and a show that's dedicated to putting a voice to remote learning. I am Brett McGrath, Vice President of Marketing at DyKnow, and I am fired up for today's show. Hopefully you all had a chance to listen to last week's episode with Chris Woods on STEM. He is the STEM guy. What I also learned is he is an excellent marketer. I thought about that conversation a lot after we had it and thought about all of the marketing tactics he leverages on a day-to-day basis to make sure that STEM is widespread and teachers are using it, and it is quite impressive. So definitely go back, check out the episode with Chris. It was definitely one of my more favorite conversations I've had on Tackling Tech so far. Real quick, just some housekeeping items. I say this every week, but continue to deliver feedback to us. It's certainly helpful. It gives us ideas on what we should be talking about with Tackling Tech and ideas for guests that we should be having. You can do that on Twitter at Tackling Tech Pod. Definitely, if you like what you're hearing on Tackling Tech, hit the subscribe button. Rate and review. We love to see those reviews coming in. They're so fun for us to read. It helps us out. It helps us get Tackling Tech into more people's headsets, which is helpful because it allows us to get more feedback and grow those listeners. So hit the subscribe button, rate us, review. That's certainly helpful. If you're interested in more content outside of Tackling Tech, DyKnow.com is the best place for that. You'll always find the up-to-date content if you hit our education tab and then go in and check out our resources there. We will be hosting the Professional Development Summit on May 29th, which is going to be a lot of fun. We're in the process right now of getting that group together, and it's going to be similar to some of the other digital events we've hosted, but a little bit different. So I'm super excited about that. We got a lot of feedback, and a lot of people in our audience are going to be responsible for building and developing professional development in the summer months. So we want to give some inspiration before those plans are developed, and hopefully we can help there. So it's going to be a ton of fun. So May 29th, go to DyKnow.com. There's a banner at the top. Hit it, register. And even if you can't make it, we will send you a follow-up with the recording. Final plug from us is join our Facebook group, Technology Coaching Conference. It's an extension of all the digital events we are doing. It's just getting going. It's fun to see different educators connect, but that's an awesome place if you're looking for a professional learning network or community. I seem to be saying this every week, but go visit the hashtag remote learning. That's where I'm finding all of the guests on on all these recent episodes, which is totally fun. It's a great place to learn about what other educators are doing, and it hopefully will give you all some inspiration. Today's guest, Rachelle Dene Poth, is a Spanish and STEAM teacher at Riverview Junior Senior High School in Oakmont, PA. What I also learned is she's an attorney, and she's got her master's degree in Instructional Technology. She is the president of the ISTE Teacher Education Network, avid presenter, author, podcaster, social media guru. She seems to do it all digitally, and I'm really excited to have Rachelle here. Rachelle, welcome to Tackling Tech. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on. How are you?
I am doing well. It's always the bright spot of my day, as we were talking before we got on here, is not spending my day in Slack talking to people at DyKnow or spending time answering or responding to email, but talking to educators like you in the market. So definitely the highlight of my day, and I'm excited to have you on Tackling Tech today.
Well, I am excited to be here to talk with you today as well.
That's great. So I guess just to get it going, I listed a lot of things you're involved with. Obviously, the presentations at conferences have gone down since COVID-19, but I know you're authoring books and you're on podcasts. You've got a podcast of your own. You're sharing your thoughts and ideas on social. Have you, ever since COVID-19 hit and we've all been locked at home, have you seen COVID-19 as a roadblock for any of those pursuits you have, or are you able to do more because you're more heads down and focused and can be focused on that outside of your job as a teacher?
It has definitely gotten a little bit easier, but what I've said to a lot of people over the last couple of weeks, and it's amazing how much time has actually passed. Like you tend to lose track of it sometimes. And, I've had these conversations, but I've looked over the past, say, 5 or 6 weeks now to see, how I've changed. What am I noticing? What are the conversations? But whenever this happened, one of the most common things that I was telling people was like, it really didn't matter what your level of comfort was with using technology itself. If you had any experience teaching online or any of that, because everything happened so suddenly, and making that shift to trying to figure out, like, how am I supposed to keep teaching what I was teaching already in my classroom and do that online, or all of the other responsibilities that we have as educators, trying to wrap our heads around where do we start? What are the things that we need to do, and worrying about our students and their families and all the support that they have and the access to the resources they need. It really was and still can be overwhelming for everybody. There are some benefits to it where I've been trying to really focus on what are some of the positive things that we can do or that we can take from this experience, and how can that help us to be better in the future. And that's where I've been trying to invest my energy, and definitely getting involved in some conversations with my students as well. Mostly, especially during the week, whenever I have some meetings with them, just making sure that I'm getting some feedback, because a lot of the things that we're doing in this remote learning, remote teaching experience are some of the things we would still do in the physical classroom, but trying to find the balance since we don't have that time to connect in person. So there's a lot going on right now. And it's, every day it just changes so rapidly, and we can all experience, any range of emotions. But I think that with time, we're kind of easing into a little bit more of a routine in a sense, and trying to figure out, the best way we do the best that we can, and use it no matter what as a learning experience and a way to prepare for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fascinating part about all of this, and I agree with you, it's settling in, it's finding your new routine in this. But I have, just like you alluded to, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about, well, what does this mean on the other side of this for K-12 education? How does technology fit into the classroom now that teachers and everyone has been forced to leverage technology? I'm curious, just what are your biggest observations that you've made as a teacher since, you've been operating remotely?
The number one thing is the need and, the importance of always making sure that we can have a decent, or as good as we can, an understanding of our students and their families and what their access is at home, and focusing first and foremost on making those connections, whether we're in our classroom, just regular school, or if we have something like this happen again in the future. And that is something that, initially, you don't plan for this, right? You might be using a messaging app, or have emails, or of course phone calls and things like that, or your school website, but you never truly know if the messages that you're sending are being received. But when you have students coming into your classroom, even if they didn't get the message that you sent, for example, you can still have a follow-up conversation. And so sometimes, whether or not they actually got that message or were able to access something that you sent, you don't necessarily know. And so I think that is something that really I've started to focus on more, and I'm noticing has been a common theme for a lot of people is finding a way to keep those connections and that collaboration going.
Yeah, and I think based on those connections and collaboration, have you found any unexpected outcomes during your time, teaching remotely, or have seen ways technology has been used for the better or the worse during this time?
Well, I know better or the worse. Let's see here. Which one do I go with first? No, I mean, it's always, it's not anything new. It's always been part of a conversation where when you're looking at technology, like there, you can have the newest, the best, the whatever it is when it comes to technology, but it doesn't mean anything if you're not using it with purpose, if you're not using instructional methods that are meaningful for the students. So I can have a classroom, or I can give, iPads or whatever the device is to all of my students, but without anything that's really, substantial, that's going to make a difference for their learning. I mean, what's the true value in that? And so the thing with technology right now is because there are, I mean, it's great. They have so many choices out there when it comes to technology, especially now. But the downside of it is that it can be overwhelming for people who haven't necessarily been using the technology, and not just for educators who, I mean, they're truly trying to do something good for students and to keep the learning going. But we also have to consider that, like, if it's overwhelming to us, it will be also overwhelming to our students and their families who are now part of this on an extended basis. And we have to consider that as well. And so, I mean, that's the kind of downside, is like, there's so many choices out there, so it can be overwhelming. But the flip side to that is you don't need to do all the things. Like, you can find one or maybe two tools that are out there to do all of the different things that you might be hoping for your class. Like if you want students to collaborate, or you want to have a video, or just the power of voice and hearing one another, you can choose one or two things to start with, which makes it more manageable. And so I think the positive in this too is, like, maybe you've always thought about adding another technology into your classroom, or there was a digital tool that you thought about using or trying, but didn't have time, weren't sure where to start. And I think that this is the time to do those things, is when we have this opportunity as we're learning and, figuring it out together, is to take those chances now and see what happens, but be mindful of, we will transition back to the classroom space. So it may come suddenly too. So we have to kind of always be thinking forward about those possibilities.
Yeah, and something that I want to hit on, because it's been on my mind this week, and I think you've been thinking about it based on our conversations. But when we all go back to the classroom after this period of time, how do you foresee technology supporting that? Is it going to be, teachers are going to be forced to use more technology because it was such a big part of operating remotely? Or is it going to be, okay, we're not operating remotely anymore, so we don't really need this technology, it's not as mission critical as it was, last month? What are your thoughts on that?
That is an excellent question. Yeah, I would hope that there wouldn't be any forcing of using any technology, just because, like, putting ourselves in the place of our students, when we tell our students, like, well, you have to do it this way. I mean, and I'm somebody who, for many years, when I would assign projects or do things in my classroom, like, I was the only one making decisions. And not that that's the wrong way to go about it, because there are times when you have to do that. But I think the idea is, like, having different possibilities that are out there. And from this whole experience, we have a range, of educators who've been using a lot of technology and have all of the ideas, and they've done the research and they have the experience. And then we have some teachers who really haven't used that much, whether because the school, they don't have access, or the students don't, so it's not used as much. But I think that's where we all come together when we are thinking about, like, okay, what are we going to do from here on out in our classrooms, is getting everybody involved in a conversation to find out what worked, what didn't work, what were the tools that you used and why, and then come to some kind of, I don't want to say, I guess, an understanding, you could say too, but thinking about how can we use some of the same tools to provide a lot of different options and opportunities for our students and the educators. And keeping in mind, again, like I said before, is like, if we have to go through a period of school closures again at some point, I certainly hope we don't, but if we do, like, what can we have set in place that everybody is comfortable with? Then it won't be such a shock or overwhelming experience for everybody who's involved. But I also think that because we're preparing students for the future, we need to help them develop those skills. And we always talk about like the future skills, but they're skills that they need to be using now, because in using technology, we still can build some of those. I mean, the collaboration, communication, all of those important essential skills for the future are ones that we need now. And especially with technology, we're able to keep that going, even though we're not in the same physical space. So I hope it'll be a big conversation.
For sure. It's a massive conversation. But like you said, I think during these times, there's always bigger opportunities that present themselves on the other time. And oftentimes we see that's when innovation really rises to the top. Something you talked about, mentioned it a couple words, is just the word together and connectedness. And I know that's something you talk about a lot, but what is this time meant for the connectedness between kind of students and families of those students and their districts?
Yeah, it's interesting just hearing from different friends of mine who are educators, and then just from parents, about how everybody is trying to kind of balance this. And I know in some schools where districts are using maybe a learning management system, or they have a messaging app or a full platform that they're using or they've been using, and everybody's kind of connected in that space. And so when this happened, you have that already set up. But then when you have some districts where maybe individual teachers were using something, or you have families where students are in different schools, different teachers, and there are all of these different forms of communication that are coming at them at the same time. And so it becomes really overwhelming. And I think that, it's so important. It's hard to tell if you have one student and you tell all of that student's teachers, okay, you all need to use this same tool. Well, if each of those teachers has been using something specific that's been working well for them, to make that change so quickly too, it's like, how do you figure it out? And so offering some options, and I know just in my experience with my school, we do have some teachers who are using Microsoft Teams, and some are using Remind and just email or phone calls, or relying on our school website just to post some information. But I think just trying to find, especially with parents, keeping them in the loop as much as you can, and working together and being open to conversations where, I have students or I have parents who might say, look, we're trying to juggle different schedules and we're all in the house and trying to use the same device. And being receptive to learning is not going to be the same as what it would be in our classrooms, and schedules are not the same. And so we really have to find a way to connect as much as we can and keep the conversations going, and be ready to change what we thought was going to be the plan, or our idea for the week, and just keep changing it as we go, because we've never been in this experience before. And the best thing we can do is just to keep that connection with our families and communicate and be honest about the experience too, because that's in sharing our story. I often say is if you're not sure if it's working, ask the students, make the phone calls home. There's lots of different ways to communicate, and you just have to try all of them so we can make sure we can get everybody into the conversation.
Yeah, and I know just communication is key to developing the connectedness through all of those parties. And I know just in my conversations with teachers across the board, it seems like every teacher has tools, and the teachers are deciding which tools are both that map to them and their communication with students, whether it's, hey, I've got Zoom, Teams, Slack, whatever it is, email, and they're picking and choosing kind of the channels that work best for them, which I think is great, and it's fine during this period of time. But do you see just the future with remote learning? Do you see the communication channels being more developed on the district end, and the district kind of pushing those communication channels with all the stakeholders and getting them to all leverage it across the board? So one student in the first period there's consistency developed, I guess, from first period to, seventh period from the student's perspective, where all their teachers are communicating with them the same way. How do you see that playing out just in the future as remote learning it evolves and advances?
Yeah, I think that to some extent, districts will have to figure out And look, if they're not already using something, find something and provide training, especially for teachers, because like I said, not all teachers use the same technology. And I think especially now when we're looking just over the period of the summer, once this academic year ends and planning for the next year, is looking what's in place and then deciding, what would work best for all teachers and students, and see what the learning curve is on it too. And then making sure to include teachers in the conversation, because that's important, and see what the options are that are available within any given platform. And so sometimes you can pick something that's very easy that everybody uses, or it's a widespread platform that all teachers use, but then teachers could still have, for me, I use Remind to send a quick reminder, or if a student has a question like that comes to me more often than not in the evening or over the weekends. And sometimes it's a little bit more reliable than email, because you never know. And so I think districts certainly will probably look at having a consistent platform across the board that all teachers and students and families know where they can find the information, but hopefully still leaving the possibility for teachers to use something that enables them to do more in their class, like some of these apps that you can have that interact with the other platforms you use, and just makes that sharing of information so much easier.
Yeah, and you mentioned Remind on the communication side, but what are some of the other tools that have been most effective for you in building and developing that student engagement during this period of time?
Yeah, the first thing that I did, actually, one of the tools that I talk about all the time, because you can do so many things with it, and it's actually one that I did a lot of webinars for elementary teachers in my school, is Buncee, because it has the ability where, as a teacher, if I'm an elementary teacher, I know I have a lot of friends who teach elementary, especially second, third, fourth grade, and they love to do read alouds or greeting their students. I mean, I love to greet my students when they come to my classroom, but the biggest thing too is helping students to develop their language skills and speaking. And so they were looking for a way where they could have videos or audio and include a lot of different resources, but keeping in mind that sharing this with younger students and their families, trying to find something that would work. And so even for my students, I use Buncee to record a short video, like a 3-minute overview of this is what to expect. I had some links to other websites and things we'd be using in the class, and I shared that with them. And so that really could be your one-stop shop, as I often call it, because you could create those videos, students can create with it. And there are already, one of the things I love about technology is that we really don't have to start from scratch when we don't have a lot of time to get started, or you're worried about if there is a learning curve. There are so many tools out there that have libraries full of examples and templates available to get started with. So for me, I use Buncee. I also use Zoom to have class meetings. Of course, like I said, Remind for sending reminders throughout the week. I do use email, but I cut it down just because the parents and students are getting emails from all of their teachers potentially every day for each class. And since I do use Remind, I told my classes and the families that I would send an email on Monday to give the overview, and then probably one other time during the week, but they could feel free to contact me at any time. But beyond that, also Padlet and Nearpod for doing some interactive. And then there are a ton of game-based learning tools that we use when we meet for our class meetings that I kind of round out our time together by playing a game.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I like the use case of Remind and how you're leveraging it. I also think it's interesting that you set those expectations up front with the parents on when they can expect to hear via that email. I think that's critical. And I think, expectation setting just across the board between teachers and parents, teachers and students, parents and students, has been an interesting topic that has popped up during Tackling Tech. And I think just from my perspective, I think I mentioned it earlier, but these times really breed innovation. And I've heard, just in terms of expectation setting, some innovative ways that teachers have been working with their students and how parents have been working with their students. And one of the things that rises to the top just in a lot of these conversations is just autonomy in general, and how it's more about here. It seems to be based on remote learning. It's less about, monitoring and really focusing on the timing and the tasks that the students are working in, but it's more, here's the canvas, here are the expectations and what you need to get done. There might be a nice day outside during lunch. You might want to go outside instead of sitting through a class, but no, at the end of the day, like, these are the things you're accountable and what you're responsible for. There's that bullet. Then there's also the conversation I've heard a lot about, just STEM and getting siblings working together since they're in the house to create projects and developing learning platforms from those projects. And it just seems like every day there's new ideas popping up that really get me excited about the future of learning. So I'm just curious, on your end, with innovation kind of popping up and bursting at the seams during this time and likely a lot afterwards, what are some of the opportunities that you've seen that can exist to do things just from a teaching style a little bit differently now?
Yeah, and I love that you use the word innovation, because a lot of times people think that just if it's innovative, like that sounds scary, like I have to do something amazing, or it's like it can be overwhelming. But the whole idea behind innovation is that you're just doing something a little bit different. A friend of mine talked about innovation. She's like, yeah, with innovation, sometimes you're just struggling, and it doesn't have to be this huge struggle. It's just making some type of a shift from maybe what you've been already doing in your classroom and taking some risks that you've thought about, but you're like a little bit hesitant to do, but now's the time. And so a couple of the things that you mentioned too, like I know with connecting with families, with a lot of the tools that are out there, even just choosing some of the different digital tools that families can engage in beyond what we would use them for education. I mean, just to name an example, a couple of years ago, I would say to my students when we'd play a game of Kahoot, if you're bored over the holidays or your family's looking for something to do, like play a game of Kahoot. There's trivia games there. The different things that we have for creating, families could engage in some of those opportunities. But I also think that now when we talk about giving students different opportunities to kind of explore on their own, using things like, and I've been doing this in my classroom too, like project-based learning, having students do place-based learning is another option, even things like choice boards, providing those online and giving students a chance to explore based on whatever they're interested in. Genius Hour has been coming up a lot as well. Just giving students that chance to kind of not such a rigid or structured kind of approach, and not relying on materials like papers or anything like that, or textbooks. Not that there's anything wrong with those types of resources, but I feel like if there has ever been a time to try any of those concepts that I've mentioned, or even like STEM or STEAM projects and things that you could do, give students and families an opportunity to kind of engage in these experiences together, and then use that as a point for next year and the next school year to think about how we can bring that back into our physical classroom. So innovation is not something that's overwhelming. It's just new or a little bit different than what you've maybe been doing, and just twisting it a little bit.
Yeah, and I kind of want to unpack that a little bit with bringing it back to the classroom, because my viewpoint is that this is a great opportunity for students and teachers to become better leaders, because I believe that there are teachers and there are students that are trying new things and innovating, and they're pushing learning forward. And as I think about those small little case studies that are happening all over the country and all over the world, I think there's really good opportunity to drive those initiatives forward. And I view those teachers and those students who are pushing the bounds a little bit while getting their work done and doing it really well as not only innovators, but also leaders. So I guess bringing it back to the classroom, bringing those ideas, what are some steps that, teachers and students might take, separately or together, in order to make sure that innovation doesn't get stuck in this remote learning bubble, but can come to the physical classroom after this period of time is over with?
Yeah, if you take an opportunity now to try something, like pick one of those, even if, let's say I'll go with Genius Hour, just because I was recently listening to Don Wettrick's podcast, and he wrote the book Pure Genius. And so when we first started with like Genius Hour and project-based learning in my classroom, he actually Skyped in and talked to my students about it, because there was so much struggle, because the students weren't being told exactly what to do, what to research, what to create in terms of sharing what they had learned. And so part of that process that we all learned is like doing activities like that. You give students an opportunity where they can become curious. They explore things that they're interested in. They, even with project-based learning, I just saw the increase in their interest in a lot of the different topics that were connected to Spanish, of course, but that tied into something that maybe they were learning in a different class. And the fact that they were able to drive their own learning, they started to build their leadership skills over time. Initially at the beginning of the year, they were a little bit hesitant, but once they got more involved in work that was meaningful, I could see like the confidence because they were talking about something they were excited about. And then when the time came to do their presentation, unlike other presentations that they might have done earlier in the year that, you know, in Spanish or whatever the topic was, because they had chosen it, they were much more confident in doing that. And so when we create these opportunities now, but we can do them in the classroom as well. So that's the nice thing about choosing things like this is it's not that it's limited to, okay, we're not in school, so we can only do this at home. They can easily transition back, and they've been in use in physical classroom settings for years, but I think it's just a good opportunity to create that opportunity again. There's opportunities everywhere, like Dawn says, that's on my mind. I think it's a great chance to create these possibilities for our students because where they are now, we don't know, like I didn't know if all of my students, for example, took home their textbooks, and not that I'm relying on it, but to have some kind of basis to stem all of the other activities from. But the more that I've thought about it with each passing week, I'm thinking about like, how can I just give my students, because they're on all different schedules, and I don't know exactly what they're doing. And I was surprised to find out some of my students are still working. And so dealing with all of that and having to have all of their classes online, I'm thinking like, what would be the most meaningful and impactful for them that would benefit them, not just for my class, but for the future. And so trying to add in some of these ideas. I mean, as a teacher, for us, we just need to know enough about the concept, like what is project-based learning or what is Genius Hour, but then give the students the opportunity to kind of take it in their own direction and see what happens. And is it a risk? Yes. Could there be mistakes made? Yes, but that's all part of learning. And then just reflect on it and then decide where to go from there.
I love that. I think that's a super cool perspective and way to look at it. And then I guess from the parent side, and I just, to me, it seems like there's been more communication ever between districts and parents. And from my perspective, having those parents invested in those schools and what's happening shouldn't be isolated to just periods of time where where districts are trying to be on full court offense with their communication because of all the uncertainties. I'm curious, do you see opportunity, with or without technology moving forward on the, relationship and communication between parents and the districts that their schools are learning in?
Definitely. And what I think is, now we have this, it is amazing. I don't know how families are managing with several children in the home and just trying to keep everything going, like the normal daily life activities, but also with the school aspect of it. And like I said earlier, I've been having conversations with friends who are teachers and then, they're the parents, and figuring out like, how's it going? What are you learning about like school? Because if you're not a teacher, has it changed since, obviously it has changed since they've been in school. And I think it is truly an amazing learning opportunity for everybody because it's overwhelming. Again, I'll keep saying that word, but I think it's also a good experience because you're making sure that there's a connection between the school and the home. And even if there weren't ongoing conversations before, or if we weren't, and I know that I needed to be better with communicating to home. Like I thought I was doing a good job sending updates and emails and contacting parents. But with all of this over the past 6 weeks, like I see that I need to be better at doing that. And now I'm noticing how to go about doing that, especially when it comes to like phone calls or emails or the different tools that are out there. The other thing that I noticed is that parents are learning more about the different types of ways their children are learning in schools, especially when it comes to technology. And the best thing I think about technology, at least a lot of the tools that we use, is that they're not specific, or they don't have to be specific to education. And so like I had mentioned Kahoot before, I think that I've seen over the past couple of weeks, a lot of these companies that are out there based on education, the EdTech companies, are really creating a system of support, not just for educators and students, but for families. And they're providing resource kits, and they're offering webinars and all of these different experiences and opportunities for parents to learn. And so I think that it's kind of interesting to see how this is building over with each passing week. But I think at the end, parents will feel even more connected to the school, and the teachers will feel more connected to the home experience of the students as well. And I'm hoping that it will just continue to kind of grow that relationship, but also continue to place the emphasis on the importance of those relationships.
Yes, I love those positive aspirations. And I think if we can move, a quarter towards that, in the coming year, then we'll have moved in the right direction and making sure that everyone's those relationships are strong between all those parties. This has been super fun. I've learned a ton. One more for you, Rachelle. I'm just curious to close this out. Advice you can offer any of our listeners who are teachers that are still in the process, might be a little overwhelmed, but trying to teach effectively during this time. What advice do you have for them?
I would say, boy, one thing, it's always hard to come up with one thing. No. The best thing is to think about, like, what are you doing? What were you doing in your classroom? What types of activities? What were you hoping to accomplish? And I know it's hard because, like, by the end of the school year, we all have these ideas of, this is where I would like to be with my students, especially if you're teaching them like I do, like Spanish 1 to Spanish 2. But when you're planning your lessons or your activities for your students, really think about what is the most important concept, or what's the content that you're covering. And also consider that it's not the ideal situation. So while you might have, like for me, I have a class period of 42 minutes where I can move around and get a really good idea of how the students are progressing it with what we're covering in class. I can have interactions, we can do activities, and then they leave, and then I see them the next day. Well, we don't have that same experience now. So really picking things that are meaningful opportunities for students to learn, but we also have to be mindful that we all need to focus on, like, self-care now as well, for ourselves, our families, our students, and their families. And so trying to kind of not try to do all the things or take on so many different things. Find one thing, try it out, reach out to your PLN. And if you don't have a PLN, start to build a PLN, because definitely doesn't, aside from being isolated right now, how we are not in our schools, but we really do need to have a support system for ourselves too, just like we need to have for our students. And so it all starts with one thing. Don't overextend yourself. Just find one place to start. Set up with communication, I think, is the biggest thing. And one day at a time.
I love that. And I love how we closed out with the self-help discussion, because I think that is the most important thing that all of us can be doing during this time, because you got to take care of yourself mentally and physically, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of others. So make sure out there you're thinking about yourself, you're not pushing yourself too hard to the limits, and making sure that all the faculty you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis is a priority, or the students are the priority. You've got to make yourself the priority first. So I love how we closed out with that thought. Why don't you, like I mentioned up front, you're doing a lot. You've got the podcast, you've got books, you've got, online presence. Why don't you tell people where they can reach you and where they can find all the content that you are creating?
Well, I am very consistent when it comes to Twitter handles and being able to contact me. So for Twitter, it's RDENE915. And that's pretty much the standard across with Instagram. People can feel free to send me an email. It's at Gmail. I do have my blog site, which is www.rdene915.com, and a podcast as well. And so even just on my blog site, I have links to my podcast and books and all kind of resources. So, but I'd be glad to answer any questions or connect.
You got to share before we leave your book, the story you told me about the covers of your books so the audience who go to your website and see the books that you have written, they know about the story behind the covers?
Yes. Okay. So the first book, in other words, Quotes That Push Our Thinking, I actually had asked one of my students, and I had seen some drawings, doodling in class one time, which years ago I probably would have yelled at the student for drawing in class. But the fact that I noticed it, I was like, if I told you words like creativity and curiosity, and I named a few other words, could you maybe come up with like a design for, and I wasn't even necessarily thinking for a book cover. So anyway, about a week and a half or so later, the student came in with the drawing that's now the cover of my book, which is a cat. That it's an unbelievable design that took that amount of time for the student to do. So when it came to my third book, which was with the same publisher, I wanted to do something kind of similar. I love trees. And so I'd asked this student to, let's work on a tree. And I got a couple of examples, but then in my mind, I said, why don't we just make some copies of this cat image and then cut it apart to form a tree? And so that's what I ended up doing, was making a couple copies, using a little bit of extra ink, and then I just cut it into pieces. And then I built a tree for the Unconventional Ways to Thrive in EDU book.
Love it. I love it. Everybody go to the website and check out those book covers. Purchase a book, support teachers like Rachelle that are doing more than teaching and trying to educate. I think it's super cool. And I've had so much fun talking with you today. Everybody out there, definitely, if you like what you heard, hit the subscribe button, give us that 5-star review, leave a review, and most importantly, everybody stay safe. Talk to you all very soon.